Hello again, my name is Dale and these are my books. Today we're going to be talking about Confessions of a Mask by Yukio Mishima. This came up in one of my book clubs. It's a relatively short novel. It's 246 pages. I actually thought it was much shorter. Now, if you know anything about Yukio Mishima, he was a writer. He was around in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and he had a particularly interesting personal life, and that is that at some point he decided that Japanese culture, Japanese society was degrading, and that what was necessary was to get the emperor back on the throne, really put the emperor in charge. And so he organized a political coup. And this political coup failed, and as a result, he committed ritual suicide. So he was a bit of a fascist, I think is normally described as. He was certainly pro-emperor. He committed suicide. It's all something that once you're told who he is, that you don't really forget. But Yukio Mishima also wrote a lot of novels, and I think some of them have been told to me as being really, really quite beautiful. The writing of Mishima, as well as the translation of his work from Japanese into English, has been really, really good. This particular book, Confessions of a Mask, is essentially a gay coming-of-age story. It seems to be incredibly autobiographical. The main character was born on January the 4th, 1925, so he was about 20 by the end of the war. He was a sickly child. He grew up with his grandmother, and when he turned 12, he discovered his favourite toy. And the favourite toy is something that many 12-year-old boys discover. I'm not even sure I can say this on Facebook, but he discovered his male reproductive organ, and he spends a lot of time in the book talking about various ways to play with his new toy. He develops a lot of gay crushes. At first, he develops a crush on somebody called Omi, and then he talks about his school days, and then he talks about going to university to study law, as Mishima did himself in real life. However, it's not just a gay coming-of-age story, because Mishima, or the character in this book, is also really, really interested in sadomasochism. So he has these very graphic sexual fantasies involving all sorts of violence and all sorts of wounds. And there's one image in particular that should be on the front cover of the book, rather than this rather abstract thing that should be on the front cover of the book, and that is the martyrdom of Saint Sebastian. So you imagine Saint Sebastian, of course, he's tied up with his hands above his head. He has arrows sticking out of his body, and the main character in that is just preoccupied with this image. There are some really good lines in it. For example, he says at one point, and this is something that perhaps not just gay men can relate to, but perhaps everyone can relate to, where he says that, but speaking, in this case, speaking of his sexuality, he says that he comes to understand that the mechanism of the fact that what people regarded as a pose on my part was actually an expression of my need to assert my true nature, and that it was precisely what people regarded as my true self, which was a masquerade. So I'm sure that can be read better, but you get the idea that that my authentic self people see as the masquerade, and when people think I'm just acting, that's actually my authentic self. So a great line there. One of the things that came up during the discussion was that this is probably the most graphic gay sexual novel that was published at the time, and it was difficult for us thinking of other gay sexual novels that had similar levels of sexual graphicness. And in fact, it's a little bit difficult to think of other novels that were written at this time, a little bit after or a little bit before, that were as sexually graphic, whether gay or straight. I mean, after all, this was a time when The Last Exit to Brooklyn was being banned in the United States. It was when Lady Chatterley's Lover was being challenged in England, although Lady Chatterley's Lover was a little bit earlier. But it was certainly very cutting edge. And I think the other thing that came up with me in particular in reading this book is that I'm always reluctant to read books which are not part of the Western canon. Or I do so with a great deal of caution. And what the caution is that I can read this book, Confessions of a Mask, and then I can say to myself, well, now I know all there is to know about what it's like to grow up in Japan in the 1930s. And of course, I have no idea what it was like to grow up in Japan in the 1930s. As a Japanese person writing for a Japanese audience, there is there's a myriad of assumptions and background knowledge which Mishima simply assumes everyone knows that a non-Japanese audience does not know. And so there are lots of questions at the end of reading this book that I wasn't aware of. For example, one of the things that really struck me was his knowledge of Western culture. Not only is the Martyrdom of Saint Sebastian a classical Western image, but he's also referring to lots of. He refers to a German sociologist. He refers to Western novels, and the question that immediately arises in my mind is that was this typical for Japan in the 1930s? Or was it really only an educated elite that was aware of these Western novels and these Western works of art? What is the author trying to convey here? And I'm sure there are dozens and dozens of references and allusions and assumptions that I just did not get simply because I'm not Japanese. So my understanding is that he's a great novelist, having written other novels that I haven't read. Confessions of a Mask, would I recommend it? Yes, it's a gay classic, so read it. Should you read it if you're not gay? Yeah, I think so. It's that interesting a novel, and there's no hints or tips I can give to make reading this novel easier. It's a very easy read, no difficulty whatsoever. The main character is the narrator. It's written from his point of view, and he bumps into other people along his life, and it comes to a satisfactory close. So, Confessions of a Mask, Yukio Mishima, I would recommend it. Give it a go, and I hope this has helped.